So I ended up doing two Sanctity of Life projects, mainly because I didn't think I'd get to work for a more traditional nonprofit organization, and the Multinational Forces and Observers under U.S. law is considered a nonprofit organization. That project was known as the Sentinel Program, and it's consumed about the last 3 months of my life as it is, and it's just now getting ready to be published. But what it really is based on is a holistic concept of a person's sanctity of life. Partially, I had this idea about 3 months ago, the idea that people should be looking out for other people and looking out for the mental health and signs of behavioral health issues and suicide intervention. But the rest of it developed after reading Stassen and Gucci's, or Gucci and Stassen's text, in which they talk about a holistic creation care that looks at the sanctity of life as being about the whole person, not just one aspect, not just what we normally think about when we think about sanctity of life, euthanasia, death penalty, whether or not abortion's included in the things like that. And that really got me thinking about this, and what does that look like, especially when you're dealing with over close to 2,000 people from 12 different nations, mixed in civilians and military, whose sole focus is the preservation of peace, not just between Israel and Egypt, but also with all the nations along the Red Sea. There hasn't been peace in over 2,000 years along the Red Sea up until about 40 years ago. So that's what the activity was. Now, to make sure that I was able to fit it in with the class, I also ended up being able to, thankfully, to the accountant who works here for the FX, the Force Exchange, Mr. Ali Tarek, or Tarek Ali, hold on, Tarek Ali, Arab gentleman who volunteers at a nonprofit in Cairo. Now, we were able to raise some supplies for them, but I really didn't get to see how they work with the ethical variables and methodology there. So I can't really speak too much on from that perspective, but it did give me the opportunity to actually work for a civilian nonprofit, if you will. So the ethical variables and methodologies I saw were unique. Whenever you have more than one nation together, whenever you have a composite of different governments working with religious leaders, working with civilians, you really end up, what are some ways that we can work together? What does the sanctity of life issue look like? Not from a US perspective and not from a Canadian perspective or a British perspective, but what does it look like to a Colombian? What does it look like to a Uruguayan? What does it look like to a Fijian? How do they view it differently? And so how can we speak to all of those nations without offending any of those nations? And so methodology was very careful, very diplomatic. We brought in people from each contingent to get their perspective and to make sure that things were done and said in a way that would not be offensive to anyone. The ethical variables. Wow. So some nations within the MFO are very much pro-life in the sense that they are opposed to abortion and they won't allow it. So believe it or not, even in a suicide intervention or prevention or mental health class, those issues come up and you can't speak about those in some cases. In others, they don't want to talk about suicide at all because it's such a mortal sin. I'm not going to mention any names, but some of them it was a really big issue, and trying to cross that bridge, it took a lot of communication and understanding, and you almost have to make people realize that you are on their side. You're not out to impose this or this on them. You're out to help them. So observations, reflections about this. I'm tired. It's been 3 months. It just got approved in Rome, actually a couple hours ago for me putting this together. So it goes hot, it goes active with about 3 days, I think, after this assignment's due. Um, but we're going to be training people for 2 days on mental health issues, on suicide intervention, on suicide prevention, and then we're sending them out there into the force to help each other out. And these are both civilians. Some of them, we have like 2 translators who are helping us out. Um, but that's not the question. The question is, what does it affirm about my personal ethics? I'm left with a lot of questions. Sanctity of life is this thing that we all claim to believe in. But as Dr. Williams said in a lecture, what's the thickness? What makes that thick? And they're all cultural variables. Now, there's a universal truth underneath that, but there are all these cultural variables of how do I talk about suicide with someone who might be thinking it, but is from a contingent who believes that they are damned? How do I talk about a woman who might have had an abortion and feels guilty about it, but she's in a contingent that it's a crime? Do I have an ethical responsibility to report that or not? That's a question. And when you're dealing with Rome and the Vatican, I'll leave it at that. Uh, but we were able to accomplish this, and I am thankful for that. And so, without further ado, I'll get on, and you can look through the rest of the stuff that we've done. And hope it's a blessing to everyone.